Hi, I'm Tim Johnson, Curator of Special Collections and Rare Books at the University of Minnesota Libraries, and the E.W. McDermott Curator of the Sherlock Holmes Collection. And it's my delight to have Bonnie MacBird here with us. Bonnie, welcome to Minnesota.
Oh, thank you.
You're going to be speaking tonight to the friends of the Sherlock Holmes Collection and anybody else interested in Sherlock. So I guess starting off, what got you interested in Mr. Holmes?
Well, I read the canon when I was 10, and I just fell intensely in love. And I think I've been an Anglophile since that time, and over the years, many, many other things pertaining to England. But for some reason, I just took to that character right off, and I read, you know, A Scandal in Bohemia first, or no, A Study in Scarlet first, then A Scandal in Bohemia, and I've just then read the entire thing.
Now, as a 10-year-old reading Study in Scarlet, what did you make of that kind of long Western interlude that
well, I remember kind of rushing through that. Where's Sherlock?
Yeah. What's all this Wild West stuff?
The thing, it's interesting you bring that up, because I mean the novellas, the 4 novellas, have these long periods of time when Holmes and Watson aren't in them a lot of the time, or in Hound of Baskervilles at least when Holmes is not in them. And so, yeah, I mean, but it's the characters that I really got excited about, and the mysteries, and I also loved the, you know, I guess it was kind of like my first superhero, really.
Any other authors at that time grab you, or was it Conan Doyle at Holmes really from the start?
It was pretty much, Conan Doyle was by far my favorite. Because I also loved the mystery element and the plotting, but I liked a lot of writers. I mean, I read, you know, all the children's classics. I had Encyclopedia Britannica, and then they had the children's classics that came with it. But I also liked other things. I mean, I loved the Oz books and Anthony Burgess books, and I loved Jack London and the Call of the Wild, and I just read pretty widely.
Reading and writing, they seem to go together. How has your reading kind of informed your work as a writer?
Well, hugely. I don't know any writers who aren't avid readers. And in fact, it's interesting because in recent times, all of us have had our reading ability diminished a bit because of the amount of time we spend on our electronic media. And that has done something actually to our focus and concentration. I teach writing at UCLA Extension, and one of the first pieces of advice I give all of them is to start reading more. To a student, they will say, you know, I used to read a lot, and now I'm reading less. And it's like, that's the first prescription. You want to write, you have to read. It's critical.
Do you send them any particular direction in terms of New Yorker or just whatever strikes their fancy?
In general, I say read fewer books about writing, because a lot of times people who want to write will just get mired in these endless descriptions of how you should be doing it, and there's a million methods, but rather to read classics, to read like the great adventure classics, and also to read great screenplays, because I teach screenwriting. So reading really good examples of both of those are highly recommended. I also ask them to just find their favorites and be exploring a bit, because it's a kind of, when you have an eclectic reading taste, that's when you often are an interesting writer.
This is your maiden voyage as a Sherlockian author? It
is. It's definitely my first Sherlockian novel.
What's that been like?
Oh, well, you know, it's interesting because I started this novel on Christmas Day of 2011. And I started it as a Christmas present to myself. I made a commitment to this, and that was my present. And when I sat down, I thought, you know, now is the time I want to write a novel. I just actually recovered from something kind of dramatic. And those kind of moments, you go, wow, I have time. Your time, you become more aware of how much time you have. And it's like, what do I want to do with this time? I really want to write a novel. Then I thought, well, about what? Because I'm going to be spending at least 2 years on this. I want to spend it with these 2 guys. That came very clear to me. I didn't necessarily think that was the most commercial thing for me to be doing. There's a lot of Sherlock out there, and I didn't do it for that reason. I did it because that's who I wanted to spend my time with.
You mentioned there's a lot of Sherlock out there. What do you make of elementary BBC Sherlock, Robert Downey Jr.
Well, over the years, I've loved so many incarnations. I mean, it started, of course, with Basil Rathbone as a kid watching the black and white, you know, on TV. But since I love BBC Sherlock, and because I feel it's very much rooted in canon, very much inspired by Conan Doyle's originals, and very true to the characters. So and it's also brilliant and funny. So I love that show very much. And I also enjoyed the Robert Downey Jr. movies as well. Some people complain about the amount of action in those movies, but I think that's quite true to canon. You know, you can't be an expert boxer unless you box a lot, for example. So you know, they don't show. You know, Conan Doyle didn't show us all of that about Holmes, but if you read through the canon, you know, there's masses of exciting action in it, and dramatic and violent action. So it's really not unlike it. So those two are my favorite recent ones, but Jeremy Brett, I think, is probably he's closest to the Sherlock Holmes I see in my head when I read the canon.
You read my mind. I was going to ask who your favorite Sherlock was.
Well, I love Jeremy Brett, but I do really like Benedict Cumberbatch, and I also really like Robert Downey Jr. So all three of them brought something unique, I think, to the role, and very Holmesian in a lot of ways. I think you know, Benedict Cumberbatch is, you know, kind of posh, and he's maybe ruder than, you know, but he's the young Sherlock who probably was ruder, you know. and I love this sort of very layered character that Downey did. He's kind of wired, and you know, he gets that manic end of Holmes, and that's clearly in the canon. And then Jeremy Brett was just, you know, very theatrical, and he's that too. So I don't know. I think they all got something. And I love Jude Law and Martin Freeman. Both of them I thought were fantastic Watsons.
And that's what I sometimes look at, is the chemistry between the two. Does it work or doesn't it?
It's crucial.
And it really is. And with Robert Downey Jr., Jude Law, it works well. With Benedict Cumberbatch, Martin Freeman, it works really, really well.
Right.
Yeah, it's that chemistry. Now, screenplays came before a novel.
Yes.
So how did your work in screenplays and your work in Hollywood and development with the studios, how did all of that inform your work as a writer for this? Well,
it informed it in a number of ways. Certainly from a process standpoint. You know, I learned to deliver on time and you know, write to deadline and so forth. But also because screenplays are very structured pieces. And there are a lot of models for the classic screenplay structure. Some movies, of course, you know, bend that model a bit, or even a lot. But there is, for an adventure story, a classic model. And so, you know, working in such a structured format, and also working with dialogue, really kind of prepared me in a lot of ways to do this, because Conan Doyle was a very different kind of writer from his contemporaries. So, for example, he had more narrative drive in his stories than most did. So there's this kind of push underneath, and it's done by, you know, the surprise element, and the fear, and the what if, and the desire to get the answer. I mean, there's lots of little ways he plants things that propel the story forward. But also, he used more dialogue in his work than his contemporaries did. So this is sort of screenwriting-ish. And of course, where it's different is that when writing a novel, especially writing in Watson's voice and in his head, you know, you have the luxury of the thoughts about what's going on. And so, you know, you don't have that. In screenwriting, you have to only write what you see and what you hear. Otherwise, it's cheating. You can't say, you know, this woman who, you know, always wished her husband was more like this. You can't see that, so you can't put that in the description. So Watson has opinions about stuff, but unlike his contemporaries, he didn't wax poetic much. He did a little bit. He used metaphor and so forth. He was kind of colorful himself, but he didn't linger on those descriptions, and so that's very screenwriter-ish in a lot of ways. So many ways.
We've been talking about the book, and we haven't had a chance for people to see the book yet. And I know you've got a copy with you there.
I happen to have a copy right here.
How did you pick the title art in the blood? Or did the title drive certain things? Or when did the title come into the process or into the picture?
Well, the title Art in the Blood came to me instantly because it's one of the things about Sherlock Holmes that fascinates me. And I believe you should write what you love and what you, not necessarily what you know, because you can look up a lot of stuff, but what you love. And I am an artist, and I'm the daughter of an artist. I'm very interested in the artistic temperament. I've read a lot of books about it, and I've experienced it in my life, my mother's life, and a lot of family members. Conan Doyle did too, by the way. His father was an artist, and his mother, while she wasn't an artist, was an incredibly interesting storyteller. So there was a lot of art in his blood as well. So art in the blood is liable to take the strangest forms, of course, is the quote from the Greek interpreter. And in it, you know, Holmes says, Watson says, but the reason you're so good at this is because you've learned all these things and you have all this catalog information and so forth. And he says, no, it's in my blood. And then he also points out that Mycroft has these abilities as well, so that implies that it's inherited. I'm really interested in whether it's inherited or whether it's learned. And in fact, to this day, that's being debated. But Art in the Blood also gave me the notion that I wanted to have some thematic content to this story, which is one of the things you need to do when you do a long form. So a novel and a screenplay are long form. Short stories and novellas are short form. But once I think you get to that longer form, you need to explore, there needs to be an exploration or something else in addition to the great adventure, in addition to the journey. Otherwise, I think you feel a little let down or empty. So this is something I just wanted to, I wanted to look at artists of different kinds. Art collecting was huge at that time. This is in 1888. So there are lots of ways that people's relationship to art features into this story.
The story travels Paris, London, the English countryside. In your own travels and knowing that you've been to those places, how did that inform your sense of place as you were writing the story?
Well, I've spent a lot of time in Paris over the years. My first husband was French, and I also have loved the Impressionist artists and studied them for a long, long time. So that was I just immediately wanted to send him into the heart of Montmartre at that particular time when it was so exciting, and I even stuck a real character in there. Conan Doyle didn't do that often. I think there were 2 or 3 in the entire canon where he put real people in. But this was Toulouse-Lautrec, and he was an Anglophile, and he thought he spoke English better than he did. But I love that era, and I've spent a lot of time, and actually when I sat down and wrote the scenes that take place in Montmartre, I knew where he lived. Actually, I mapped the address where Lautrec lived in December of 1888. I knew that the Eiffel Tower was partly constructed. I have a picture of it in that week. And this stuff is all in my annotations, by the way. And so I walked the route that they ran from the Chat Noir, where there was a big action scene. They ran and took refuge in his apartment. So I actually walked that route and found it on antique maps and see if the names were changed in some of the streets and where it was a hill and so forth. So I did that, and then I basically walked and visited as many things as I could. So I also visited a Victorian silk mill, which is up in Macclesfield in England. They have a beautiful Victorian mill still extant with all the equipment, all the machinery, so you can walk around and see it. So I set something there too. So I love if I'm able to, I'd love to be able to actually kind of location scout, really, because what happens when you're actually in the place is other ideas come to you. So, you know, when I learned more about in the Chat Noir, there was this wonderful thing called the théâtre d'ombre, the theater of shadows, which is a nice, scary word. And when I saw the mechanics of that, it's an oiled screen, and there's a light that's it's translucent, and they put these zinc figures behind it to do these like Balinese shadow puppets. And so I thought, you know, that could be interesting. And I saw pictures of what it was chaotic backstage with these very dangerous lights, and there's all kinds of it was just a fun location. I thought, I have to set, something exciting has to happen right there, So sometimes it's the chicken and the egg as to which thing comes first.
One of the parts in your book that made me squirm a bit is the children.
Yes.
And without giving away the plot. Those, to me, would have been difficult to write or to think about.
Well, I actually did think hard about that choice. If I don't want to give it away too much either. I don't want to spoil the end, but I mean, first of all, there are two endangered kids there, and one of them actually facilitates the rescue. So, I mean, there's quite a heroic little kid there. And in fact, neither of them, well, I really hate to give this away.
Well, let's back it back.
Let me put it this way, is that I carefully chose how they ended up and what actually happened to them. But the danger, I felt, needed to be extreme, extreme danger. And I also wanted to pit Holmes against some truly terrible people. Because, I mean, by contrast, who he and Watson are is so gigantic. And I think he needs a worthy villain. Yeah. And so this person was pretty terrible, but very, very covered and very,
Yeah, and it's in many ways it's an extension, going back to Dickens, what's happening with the Industrial Revolution and the changes in the laws regarding child labor.
Right.
And
it was exactly going on right at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, they were changing the laws, but they were not really quick to implement all these laws. And children were still being horribly taken advantage of, especially kids that nobody was looking out for, like orphans. I mean, they would take them from the orphanages and throw them into the factories, basically. Yeah. So that does happen in this book.
The other sense that kind of comes not only from the children but throughout your book, and it's also on your blog, is this idea, more than idea, it's being passionate about your work. Speak to that passion.
Okay.
Whether it's in the art that you do, the writing, which was also an art, the art in your own blood. Speak to that passion.
Well, I'm always leading in terms of my creative work with something I want to say and something I want to express that's important to me. And also, I so love this character, Holmes and Watson both, but I so love Sherlock Holmes because of what he represents. And his unique abilities and all of that, but also his desire for justice. He's not a morally compromised hero. I'm tired of morally compromised heroes. They populate the popular media right now, and I'm tired of it. I'm just that's the easy route. To be a person like Sherlock Holmes, that's something to be emulated. And I think we need more heroes. I really do. It's a very complicated world we live in. Well, it's always been. I mean, it's not like suddenly it's complicated, but it's a very dangerous, complicated world now. And it's one where everything is gray. Things are gray. And Sherlock Holmes deals in black and white. He wants justice. I'm speaking, kind of emotionally here, but I believe I've been in entertainment all my life, or all my professional life, and I believe entertainment, an entertaining story or a movie is the way to speak important ideas. But not like, sending a message like Sam Goldwyn said, you want to send a message, use Western Union. It's more like showing what it can be, what a human being can be, something to idealize.
The potentials, the possibilities.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so I think this is the way to do it. And meanwhile, have given you a great ride, a ridiculously fun, dangerous, exciting, visual and funny ride, and then the subtext is something important. The subtext, there's a number of ideas in here, but one of them is that the artistic temperament is a sort of Janus-faced gift of gives you the vision. You see things that others don't see. You see patterns that others don't see. And when you make you take chaos and you turn that into a pattern, and that explains something to you. That's what Holmes does when he is out as being a detective. He's also, we think of him as a scientist, and he is a scientist, but he's also this artist. Those two things are not really so far apart, actually.
Art and science are often
they're very
working
similar.
in tandem.
Exactly, and humor too. Here's a funny thing. Arthur Koestler connected humor, science, and art in this way. He said each one of them involves a discovery. So when you discover something that's funny, you say, ha! And when you discover something in science that's new, you go, aha! And then when you discover something in art that's beautiful, you go, ah, right, exactly. You know the Koestler thing.
I don't.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that one before.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
great. That's
And so they're very, very connected. My husband is a scientist, but he's also an artist. And, you know, I am an artist, but I treasure logic. So, you know, and these things are very, very connected, and Holmes is so refreshing in that he is logical and yet he's very emotional too. But the underpinnings are just the desire to do right in the world, the desire to help people and have justice prevail. Not the desire to be nice at a party.
Yeah.
It can be, yeah, you can be incredibly rude, and that's fun. You know, it's fun to watch because we all would love to get away with some of this stuff. But the base of him is so powerful and so force for good. So I just love that, and I you know, I'm not embarrassed to say that. It's not particularly in style necessarily, and yet I think this resurgence in popularity of Sherlock Holmes is because we need that. We want that, you know. And of course,
there's a void.
Yeah, there is a void, and yet he's cool enough, and he's rude enough, and he's, you know, he
obnoxious.
Yeah. So he's fun, and he's really fun to watch. But he's also a mystery. He himself is a mystery. So we don't know his childhood and what's the deal with women. Right. What is that? You know, we don't know.
Where he went to school.
Yeah, where he went to school. I have a theory.
Which is?
Oh, I think he went to Fetis in Scotland.
Ah.
Yeah, that's
not St. Andrews.
No.
No.
No. So anyway, that's my current theory, and I've been talking about that with Roger Johnson.
Is this gonna roll out as a second story?
Well, there is a second novel in work. It's set in Scotland.
Okay.
It's called Unquiet Spirits, and it has to do with the whiskey business and ghosts. Ghosts of your past.
Okay.
So I have a 3-book deal with HarperCollins, and two novels of Sherlock Holmes and an option on the third. So the second one I'm well into.
You're into it, yeah.
Well into it, yeah.
One of the other things that it struck me when I first saw the advanced reading copy is just the art. And you were an artist, you're a watercolorist.
Yes.
What kind of interactions, involvement did you have in the jacket for the book? And can you show me the jacket again? And the other artwork that you've done?
Yes. Well, there's 2 pieces of art that ended up in the mainstream edition. This piece of art was done by a designer named Stuart Bash, who was at that time the lead designer at HarperCollins UK. This all came out of HarperCollins UK, by the way. And I love this. I mean, I didn't really have a whole lot of say. However, so they sent me the first version of this, and I don't know if you can see it, but there's a map of London kind of embedded in the back, and these blood spatters and this figure of Holmes. The first iteration had him short and squat, and he looked like Poirot. And I said,
doesn't work.
That's not Holmes.
No.
And then I sent them the description in the canon, you know. Something like 6 feet, but so excessively thin he seemed taller, something like that. I sent them those exact words, and then I photoshopped the figure, and I elongated him and cut this in, and had him hitting near the top, so he'd look taller because he was like down here originally. And they took my notes. I was so thrilled. But the essential design is this wonderful designer, Stuart, where I thought he did a heck of a job. And then I said, but you have to work Watson in somehow. So this is how he did that.
Got the bowler on the back.
Because it's as much about the friendship. I mean, that's one of the key elements to this. Then in addition to that, there are these wonderful drop caps at the head of each chapter, and each one has a little picture embedded in it that has to do with the chapter. So if you look carefully there, I didn't actually do those, but I commissioned them to be done, and I had them done before this went to HarperCollins. And then when I had them, I showed them to them, and they said, "Yes, we'd like to use that."
I had to ask because I'm always interested in all of the pieces that go into making a book.
Yeah.
You know, your work as the author, the designers, the artists, everything. You know, makes it into that final package.
There were so many things. I mean, I should tell you that first of all, that it went through many iterations even before HarperCollins got it. So I wanted it to work for serious Sherlockians. I think I'm a serious Sherlockian, but there are people who are way more serious in terms of the degree of detail of their knowledge of the canon and of the era. And so I ran it by Les Klinger and Catherine Cook, and they gave me their Sherlockian input, although mistakes are not theirs. And also I ran it by, I have a writers group that meets regularly, and that's something I also suggest to writers, is that they find a group of like-minded colleagues who we support each other. All of them are published mystery writers. We meet every Wednesday and we read aloud to each other and give tough love on this stuff, very tough. I also worked with an Oxford University press editor who went through this with a fine-tooth comb to make sure there weren't Americanisms left in. It's a lot more than spelling the word color. Yeah. There's a lot more to it, and she turned out to be a gem. She even said, "Oh, you've got him in the wrong corner of Waterloo Place. I know because my husband's a member of the Reform Club." And I thought, "You're the right person. You're the right person to help me out here." So I had layers of help, and I consulted with chemists and historical medical people at the Wellcome Library. I'm just tons of research. Really, a year's worth of research.
Yeah. One last question I've got to ask, and that is Watson's voice. How does a contemporary 21st century author find that 19th century Victorian voice of an army doctor?
I hope it works. I did a number of things to do that. First of all, I've read them over and over. I started each writing day by reading from the canon aloud, and then he just started talking in my head. And because I've had acting training, I think, and also because I've written a lot of dialogue as a screenwriter, I mean, I tend to do what we call in screenwriting audiating, which is basically I fully hear it in my head. I hear the voices completely. And so his voice just came to me. And then as I was sort of speaking in this voice, every now and then I would get like a little twinge that this didn't feel right, but I would continue on, and then later I would check. And so I would check structurally, but I would also check whether, like a word, did it ever appear in the canon? So I could search the canon as a single document. So I did do a lot of checks, but I didn't do that while telling the story, because that would have gotten in the way, and I would have gotten all hung up and sound formal and so forth. So the first pass was just speaking as Watson, just becoming Watson on the page. And I've always, I wrote a funny article for the Watsonian about how I'm like Watson and not like Watson personally. but in a way, I think I love his very direct way of speaking. I love the way he sees things, and I love his love for Holmes. And he's funny. He's really funny, and I love him. I love him for that.
Bonnie, thank you for Art in the Blood.
Oh, you're welcome.
And thank you for spending this time with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah.